Pension fund nears, several employers and employees are reaching out to EPFO to seek an extension. We'll bring you all those details right here on Newsline. With me at this point in time in the studio, my colleagues Amit Ranjan and Karthik Malhotra. Krishna Kumar is also joining us, I'm given to understand. Gentlemen, thanks very much for joining us this morning. I want to straight up begin by asking the big story that we're tracking, and that is Modi's maiden state visit. It was day 3. If you could quickly run us through what all happened, what was in the agenda?
So a lot happened. Of course, there was the congressional address, there was the state dinner, but I think what really drives some interesting news back home is the fact that the MOU has been signed between General Electric, GE Aerospace and the Government of India, and this is on an 80% technology transfer for the F414 engines. Now, why is this relevant? I think it's very important to note that our HAL autonomously, indigenously produced aircraft, Tejas, have been facing engine problems, and we haven't yet been able to replace our old Russian fleet of MiG-21s and even the newer MiG-29s. Now, Tejas, developed by HAL, is going to be a clear replacement aircraft for the Indian Air Force and be able to commence operations successfully deployed across cordons if the engine problem is sorted. And these engines and the technology for these engines are going to be provided by General Electric, GE, and that MOU got signed yesterday. So I think this is one real solid piece of good business and defense news coming in from Prime Minister Modi's visit. Now, in addition to that, of course, Amit will enlighten us more, but the next big thing is Micron setting up its plant in Gujarat, and Micron giving us that boost in the arm, that shot in the arm, which is required for India's semiconductor industry.
That is correct.
And semiconductor industry has been in focus ever since the start of the pandemic, ever since supply chains got hit and China's zero COVID policy ensued. When we were completely dependent and at a loss to procure enough semiconductors, enough chips to go into electronic components or even to go into automobiles, cars, and the entire electric fleet that we want to develop in India. So Micron setting up its testing and assembly plant in Gujarat in India, 1100 crore rupees invested by Micron directly for a 2200 crore project, out of which the remaining 1100 crores coming in through the government's PLI scheme, performance linked incentive scheme, which is going to really give a boost to India's manufacturing of semiconductors.
All right, so it was the jet engines, it was also semiconductors, and important interesting developments coming in there, as Karthik mentioned, an MOU that was signed between HAL and GE to manufacture jet engines, which basically marks a beginning of an important era of defense ties between the two countries. India so far, stayed away from having defense relationships with America to this extent, essentially because you don't want to develop on one country when it comes to defense procurement. But this is a significant era of development, and you had MOUs being signed and also promises being made from GE to Micron to a lot of other companies. Amit?
The big difference this time is, one, it is a victory for Make in India. These engines are supposed to be manufactured in India. So that is one big shift. Two, our problem with primarily the US when it came to defense was basically technology transfer. That has changed this time. Whether it is drone technologies, whether it is jet engines, so that has changed. Another thing, what make result in further Make in India in other fields is research and development facilities that are going to be set up in India by, let's say, even applied materials. There are talks of big investments. Of course, there are roadblocks from domestic players also when it comes to Starlink, SpaceX and Tesla. But that is in the offing, and the ground has been set up for those kinds of talks in the days to come. And close on the heels, Google, there's news at the same time of Google shifting a large part of its production to India following Apple. So it has been a very good trip when it comes to basically business is concerned, as far as Prime Minister Modi's trip is state visit is concerned.
Okay.
So primarily, I think we are looking at a juncture in India's history where India-US relations are at an all-time high. And I think especially in the case of defense procurement, we have thus far been fairly dependent on Russia as our trade partner. And the equation between US and Pakistan when it comes to defense deals has always been a highlight and a sore point for India as well. So the entire F-14, F-16 fleet is with Pakistan, whereas we have thus far been dependent on Russian MiGs and Russian Sukhois. So I think this all-time high of trade relations, diplomatic relations, friendly relations between India and US comes at a time where perhaps US is also trying to signal to Russia that your business in India could get impacted, and India is also giving a subtle message back to Pakistan and China and even Russia that we've got other friends too who can help us if required.
Right.
But most importantly, I think the whole drive of being self-reliant, make in India, and be able to produce our own defense equipment, our own engines, our own aircraft comes squarely on the back of this technology of transfer. Remember, it's not a deal where you're going and you're buying a few engines. It's not a deal where you're going, in the case of drones, it's different because we are procuring the Reaper drones, but then eventually the idea is to set up the Reaper drone facility for the Indian Navy, the MRO facility for that, which is the maintenance, the repair and operations facility for the Reaper drones, which we are buying, also referred to as the Predator drones. So that is also coming up, but I think I'm most excited about the fact that it is a transfer of technology and not just a case of purchase. What happens there is your dependence on serviceability, your dependence on upgradations, maintenance, all of that reduces drastically.
Right.
So because you have the technology and you have the license to continue producing engines using that technology. So I think that is absolutely good news.
And you know, fairly, even before this visit, I think we all were aware that this is going to be about technology. This is going to be about procuring critical technology from AI to semiconductor to now defense. All of that augurs well. So if we were to sum this up, and I'd like to get Krishna here into the discussion. Krishna, if we were to sum this up, this is being seen as an attempt made by India to procure that technology and some progress made therein, because you have an R&D facility which is likely to come in by the way of applied materials. You also now have GE hoping to bring jet engine technology into India, so make in India there, getting some sort of boost as far as day 3 and the overall visit of Prime Minister in the US is concerned.
That's right, Shweta, and make in India, and more importantly, technology transfer. Technology was the main focal point of discussions, is what that's come out from the Ministry of External Affairs, saying that no, it was not in a limited way that technology was discussed, but technology across domains, from energy to space to defense. These three important verticals under which technology transfer, creating technology together, all of that has been discussed, and that is probably the biggest takeaway amongst all takeaways, if you ask me, from this historic state visit. The only Indian Prime Minister to address the US Congress twice. It's come at a time when, and it's beautifully, it was put across saying that, you have kids in India dressing up as Spider-Man for Halloween, and you have kids in the US dancing to Natu Natu from RRR. That's where we are at this stage in an increasingly connected world. And we are at the cusp of artificial intelligence taking over all of our lives. So it's very important that as far as technology is concerned, the oldest democracy in the world and the largest democracy in the world works together, because our future is going to be technology. And this particular meeting of Prime Minister Modi and President Biden was all about technology, is the inside information we're getting from the Ministry of External Affairs. More than 20 areas of cooperation in technology have been discussed. That's what we understand at this time. More than 20 areas. So we'll have to see how they end up as, MOUs and, R&D centers like Amit was talking about, which India, needs. So I will wait for the outcomes of all of this, but I will be expecting a lot of tech outcomes, Shweta.
All right, so a lot of tech outcome expected there, but deals signed on papers versus Karthik deal materialized. I think there's a long road ahead for that. All in all, if I were to look at it, and from my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, this is more about signaling. This is more about India's soft power. This is about India asserting to the world that we have arrived. And especially when you mentioned China, you mentioned Russia, and you mentioned Pakistan in the state address. yesterday, which was yesterday for us, but the third day morning for them, Prime Minister also hinted at cracking down on terrorism. So as to say, hinting at Pakistan, standing up and saying that this is our common enemy and we need to work together towards ensuring that we fight that common enemy together. So I think it was more about signaling. This is more about the signaling to the world as opposed to what we may finally get, because sometimes these deals never materialize.
You're right, Shweta. So I think 9/11 and 26/11 have been significant moments for the US and for India. Right, and that is where I think terrorism was taken absolutely seriously, and it was very clear in our consciences, respectively, as Krishna mentioned, in the oldest and the largest democracy, that terrorism is a common enemy. Of course, it's been 2 decades to 9/11, and it's been almost 15 years to 26/11. But we have seen and we have asserted our stand against terrorism fairly clearly. And I think this shaking of hands and a joint sort of address stating that we are together in our fight against terrorism is obviously a signal to all rogue states out there that that this is not a matter that is going to be taken lightly at all. But shifting away from terrorism, specifically in the case of business,
and I'm just as you were speaking, we saw those visuals, very interesting. Satya Nadella walking in, Sundar Pichai walking in, Mukesh Ambani walking in, 400 guests invited from the business community to attend that state dinner.
That's right, absolutely. So again, we are looking at,
and that's Anand Mahindra there.
Anand Mahindra there. So we are looking at one point at US business coming into India. At another level, we are looking at Indian businesses expanding to the US as well. Anand Mahindra, for example, when the XUV 500 was launched, one of the target markets for Mahindra and Mahindra was the US. Now, when you talk about the oil refineries that Reliance owns, now, okay, we are still importing oil from Russia, but the refineries that produce the diesel that get exported out of the Gujarat Jamnagar refineries has Europe as the target market. So India is no longer just a receiver of doles or incentives or businesses coming into India, but pretty much an equal stakeholder wanting to even export its services outside of the country. And this, incidentally, now is not restricted to technology alone. And with, of course, we've seen Apple manufacturing in India. India's mobile smartphone exports to a tune of $11 billion pretty much suggests that what is made in India is no longer only consumed in India, but also consumed in other parts of the world. And for that, it's important for these kind of relationships and partnerships to get forged. But coming to your moot question on handshakes resulting into signatures, signed, sealed, and at some point to be delivered, I think, there is a journey to traverse. It's not something that is going to happen overnight. It's not something that will happen even in a span of a year if you were to really, look at a short-term to medium-term impact. And these deals require a lot of negotiations. Srinath was on a show yesterday and he mentioned the kind of challenges that we continue to face on land acquisition, land reforms, labor reforms, skilling of labor, and then overall the ease of doing business. I mean, there are contrary reports everywhere, where some reports released by the government of India suggest that our ranking on ease of doing business is improving. Niti Aayog backs that up, and there are contrarian reports coming from other parts of the world where they suggest that we are still stuck in bureaucratic hurdles. So it is going to be a long time, a long, slow negotiation process for any of these handshakes to really materialize into concrete business deals. So I think once you sign the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding, it is pretty much only a letter of intent that we intend to work together. We intend to work together on such and such areas, and this is our expectation versus this could be your demand, and this is how we intend to meet. So it is pretty much a letter of intent, a memorandum of understanding, and not really a signed contract. The signing of contracts still, so for example, HAL did not comment yesterday anything more than suggesting that we are still waiting for the fine print to arrive. This is for the GE Aerospace engines deal. So there's often a slip between the cup and the lip, and many great initiations like these, the visuals that we are seeing, seem to be a great kickstart. Many of them get into overdrive, but many of them also end up being dud deals.
Dud deals fail to deliver, may not materialize.
They fail to even reach a contractual stage.
Absolutely. But all in all, I think a good show there, a good show that boosts morale here in India and hopefully also in the US, and in a signaling of a greater partnerships between the two countries. We will of course have to wait and watch out for how many of those deals will actually materialize on paper in years to come. But we're going to move on for now. Another important story that we are tracking, and that is with edtech giant BYJUs. We're now given to understand as many as 3 board members and the auditor has also resigned. Now this is becoming increasingly difficult for Byju Ravindran, if I were to take names and say so. After failing to pay back the loan or saying that we are not in a position to pay back the loan, subsequently firing about 10,000 people, now this 1,000 people, and so it's not looking very good at this point in time in BYJUs.
Right. So Shweta, Deloitte Haskins has resigned as the auditor. Fact. 3 non-executive board members have resigned from the board of BYJUs. Speculative. So the statement that got released
as well,
and unconfirmed, right? So the statement that the BYJUs officials released yesterday pretty much states that media reports citing this resignation of 3 non-executive board members is in the realm of speculation, but they have not even denied it, right? So they haven't said that the statements are false or the reports are false. They are saying it's in the realm of speculation. Now, coming back to what are the issues surrounding BYJUs, and let's break that down. BYJUs was a company that had a massive head start in the year 2020 when India and the world was in the grip of the pandemic. And BYJUs was not alone. It was, of course, one of the early movers because the company has been in operation since 2015, 2016. But you also had the likes of Vedantu and many more edtech companies which really wanted to go and sort of clench deep into the online learning market, which everybody thought is the new world order. Fortunately for the world and unfortunately for these edutech companies, it wasn't a new normal. It was reality for a period of time, but then the world opened up, the pandemic receded, and online learning has taken a massive blow on its chin. Now, during this growth process, BYJUs, of course, in addition to raising funds at exorbitant value from venture capital funds and the likes of Sequoia, Tiger Global and what have you, you have the best VCs, the most renowned VCs invested in BYJUs in the year 2020, 2021. But thereafter, BYJUs over-leveraged itself and undertook a loan of $1.2 billion. Now, this is pure leverage. This is a pure case of taking a loan against a sort of, collateral and now not being in a position to repay that loan. Now, as a result of all of this, BYJUs has known, and you mentioned Byju Ravindran, but I would say not just Byju Ravindran himself, but a lot of top officials in the company, including the CFO back then and the new CFO who's recently joined from Vedanta. They have known for a while that there is a problem with the books. It is very difficult to continue to raise valuations when you are over leveraged, when you don't have a cash flow which is going to enable you to repay your loans, and at a time when there is a funding winter and BlackRock, for example, has cut BYJU's valuation to a third of what it was. Remember, BYJU's was valued at about $24 billion. It was India's most valuable startup. It was a decacorn 2.5 times over. It was a large mammoth startup. Its valuation has now come down to $8.4 billion, which is still a very high valuation, but that's where we are. Valuation has cut down. Its ability to raise funding from VCs is looking difficult because its books are not in place. And it has a massive $1.2 billion loan which it doesn't know how to repay. Now, what has happened in this process is that over the last 2 years, in fact, more than that, in 2021, its books got audited by Deloitte Haskins, and there were certain changes and certain modifications requested, or rather stipulated by Deloitte Haskins, which the company has been mum about. So 2021 books also apparently had issues which have not yet been addressed by the management, and 2022, FY 2022, not calendar year, FY 2022 and FY 2023 books are yet to be audited. financial statements are yet to be handed over to the auditors. So there are very clear and present corporate governance issues with management of the books, and as a result of which Deloitte Haskins has taken the step to resign as the auditors. And they're saying, despite our repeated requests, the 2021 revisions to the books have not been made, and we are yet to receive the financial statements for FY22 and FY23, and we are already in FY24. So Deloitte, as a result of that, has quit. Whether board members, non-executive board members have resigned or not, I think we will have to wait for clarity on that, which should come in the next couple of days.
Amit, I won't come to you first before I move to Krishna. What exactly does it mean for BYJUs? The fact that the auditors have resigned, the 3 board members, whether they have resigned or not, BYJUs has denied, calling it, and I quote, entirely speculative, which means they're not agreeing to it just as yet. But what does it mean for auditors to leave at this point?
The biggest hit will be on brand Byju. Remember, they are the brand ambassadors for our Indian cricket team. So that is the biggest hit, and from coming down from 22 to 11 and now to a little over 8, that's a big come down in valuations. And then they are in the news for other different reasons. They are fighting a case in the US for 1.2 billion repayment. Deloitte has left them. Deloitte is a big brand. So, of course, they have already announced a replacement for Deloitte, that is BDO, MSK and Associates. But the biggest hit, according to me, would be on brand Byju.
Okay, absolutely.
Other things they will, I'm sure, in times to come, they will take care of. As Karthik said, a little over 8 is also a big valuation when it comes to startups. Also, keep in mind, EdTech is one of the sectors where customer acquisition costs are very, very high. So it is not an easy sector to basically play in. These guys obviously overhired during the pandemic. There was a frenzy of hiring during the pandemic, and that is why these corrections are happening.
Okay.
So
but
it's here to stay.
Since you've tracked hiring, they let go of approximately 3,500 employees,
up to now.
And then they said that this is it. We're not going to let go of any more. And then suddenly, on the back of their inability to pay back the loan and the legal woes, that the legal battle that they're fighting in the US, they let go of additional 1,000 employees. Are we not to connect all of these? Are these lines, dotted lines that need to be connected?
Correction. It was 2,500 before this 1,000, so it's a total of 3,500.
So that's that.
Yeah, but they have not said that this is the last this time.
Because actually they did in a letter
Earlier
internally.
On, yes, but not this time around. So I am pretty certain they are here to stay, this company. But yeah, the biggest hit, again, I will repeat myself, is on brand Byju.
Right,
yeah.
Right. Okay, what does it mean for students, Krishna, for people who are, and I'm not essentially a customer of Byju's, but people who are, families those who are. I mean, there have been allegations on those sides as well, that there's been an attempt made by Byju's to sell you their product, whether you like it or not, then you don't get the money back when you're asking for it. So there have been problems on the customer acquisition side as well. But what does it mean for customers at large, people who have subscribed to BYJUs, who have courses enrolled into? Does this have any impact on customers?
It will have impact on customers eventually, Shweta, but not today. What will happen is that, you have these companies not willing to finance the users of BYJUs as well. Bear in mind, BYJU's entire growth was built upon non-bank financing. And that will certainly take a hit with what is going on at BYJU's right now. Right now, you have only Byju Ravindran and family members on the board of BYJU's. That's what it's reduced to. There is Byju Ravindran, his brother Riju Ravindran, and his wife Divya Gokulnath. Byju Ravindran's wife Divya Gokulnath. These 3 are the only ones left on the board of BYJU's. Only family members left. So, these are worrying times for BYJU's, and customers should be doubly more aware as to all the developments that are going. But Shweta, if we take this back a little bit, there's nothing new that's happening. It was in September 2022 when BYJU's announced their results, their financial results, after an 18-month delay. That was September 2022. And immediately after that, in October 2022, they ended up firing 2,500 people. And now, there's no stop to when this seasons of firing, waves of firing will stop. And you're looking at around 12,000, 30,000 people who've already been let go of. So BYJUs is going through a difficult time, and more importantly, I think BYJUs is also going through a difficult time because of its ability to acquire customers being reduced drastically in the post-pandemic world, like Karthik was talking about. EdTech sector as a whole has been having difficulties. I mean, we saw that HDFC Bank manager video where he was yelling at his team for not getting their targets. Imagine what is happening at all these EdTech companies. Even before the HDFC manager story became big, it was the EdTech managers who are telling their team members to reach their targets, to get as many customers on board, tell them what you need to tell them, but get them on board. So there were already huge concerns on the promises that EdTech companies, not just BYJUs, all EdTech companies in the space that had phenomenal growth during the pandemic. How are they acquiring customers? Are they using ethical means to acquire customers? Are they selling them the right things in the right way? There were already concerns about that. If those concerns were not enough, the status or the financial status or the methods of operating and governance at these EdTech companies are accentuating those fears even further, Shweta.
And it's interesting that you pointed out that the lenders are not being served any. I mean, the people who are hoping to get a register to BYJUs or get their courses are not getting loans that they need at this point in time, because lenders are also becoming increasingly wary of BYJU. So I think, going back to what Amit said, this takes a hit on brand BYJU and on the brand that this company has been able to build in a very short span of time, Krishna.
Right, Shweta, and it's very sad because brand BYJU was the a talisman brand for the EdTech sector in the country. Shah Rukh Khan is there on it, for God's sakes, funding the company and supporting the brand. So BYJUs was considered an example for the possibility and the potential for EdTech sector. Indians' ability to take to learning online, Indians' ability to provide learning online, especially because of how education doesn't reach so many people. You can talk about EdTech and the potential for EdTech in a country like India, where not enough children go to school, not enough school classrooms exist, not enough class teachers exist. So EdTech is supposed to fill in that education gap. And of all EdTech companies, the biggest of them all is BYJUs. And when BYJUs' brand takes a hit, my fear is that what's going to happen to brand EdTech in India? Because just because you have a corporate governance issue in BYJUs or other kinds of issues at BYJUs does not mean you give up on the potential for EdTech in the country. It's all about making sure EdTech is done the right way in this country and it reaches the people who need it the most. So while we sit here and deconstruct how badly brand BYJUs is going to take a hit, I'm more concerned about brand EdTech, Shweta.
Okay. Valid concerns, Karthik. What happens to brand EdTech? We've discussed this, and I think, drawing an example from what Rakesh once pointed out, there's a lot of Me Tooism here. You have one company on another trying to build on a model that BYJUs or a Vedantu may have, but haven't found a lot of success. But after the big toppling down of BYJUs from that position to now where it is at the moment, with all the financial and the legal trouble, does it mean that brand EdTech could also take a hit?
Absolutely, and brand EdTech, I think, has already taken a hit pretty much because there isn't as much demand for EdTech as there was 3 years ago, or even 2.5 years ago. We have come to realize that economies the world over have opened up. Distance education, online learning is something that was very, very hot during the pandemic. And it stayed for about a year and a half. And thereafter the economy opened up, schools reopened. There was no need for children to be glued in front of their computer screens anymore. So I think overall EdTech as a sector has taken a beating. Now, what do these valuations really stem from? They stem from the enormous amount of data already resident with these companies and their ability hence to use that data to develop new products, new features, new courses, which may be over and above the traditional school education.
Right.
And that continues to give them some value. Now, it's not a question of these companies being profitable. In fact, when books were audited in 2021, FY21, BYJUs was running a loss of 4,500 crore rupees. 4,500 crore rupees. That was kind of loss that BYJUs was running on its books. So,
and we don't know about the losses in financial year 22-23 because the books have not been revealed.
Of course, but there's a great chance that the losses are going to be even higher than 21, because in 21 there was at least some assured business coming to the company month on month, which tanked thereafter. So yeah, I think if I were to stick my neck out and say, unless or until there is another work from home, school from home situation for any reason, and I hope it doesn't happen, and a pandemic should not be one of the compelling factors there, but unless there is this real need for schools to be shut down, edutech is going to be a fringe player in the larger education market rather than a mainstay.
Okay, and we hope it doesn't so happen that there is a need for people to start going back to their computers to start learning again. But as far as BYJUs is concerned, there are just two ways out for BYJUs, as we can see. One would of course be that people start going back home, start schooling from home, or that they revolutionize their working model, their business model. We don't know whether that's going to happen or not. Yes, Amit.
There is a third way out, taking the Flipkart example. There is one big giant which is invested heavily in preschooler education across the world, and that's Disney.
Okay. And as you mentioned, they were in
Watch
talks.
that space. So
BYJUs was in talks with Disney.
Once upon a time they were. I believe there was some collaboration also between them in their early stages, but that is not. But Disney is a big player across the world in preschool education, as it has been for years. So that is something taken from the Flipkart example with Walmart. That could be the third way out.
A $24 billion sellout perhaps on the cards.
Right, okay. And if that happens, remember, we told you first. But we're going to move on now. RBI Governor Shaktikanta Das has cautioned against inflation. We're also now given to understand, Karthik, from the minutes of the meeting of the RBI MPC panel that are emerging from 8th of June, that there was a difference of opinion on whether there should be a pause or a cut. Two members disagreed.
Yeah, there was a difference of opinion, but I think the motion was passed 5 to 6, 6 to 5.
Not unanimous.
Not unanimous. But I think what is important here is, I love this term called a hawkish pause. You know, you're either hawkish or you're dovish. But when you pause, you've just taken a pause. Now, certain members of the MPC are not very happy with this successive second month of pause, and that has come out in the MPC minutes that got released yesterday. What this means really is that you know, we've been able to, with these consecutive rate hikes over all of last year, which paused only in the month of May and then continued in the month of June, what it has done is it has brought inflation down to pegging it to about 5.1% for FY24. This against 6.7% inflation that we saw in FY23. Now, RBI is saying that while we had a threshold of 2 to 6%, with our focus being at 4%, now we want to go after that 4%. We don't want to stay comfortable that our 4% has a plus minus 2% range. And while we are squarely within that plus minus 2% range right now at 5.1%, there is anticipation that inflation could hit us harder in the second half of the year. And keeping that in mind, I think the minutes of the MPC very clearly reveal that it is a hawkish pause. It is a position to sort of be in a brace position, that there could be a situation where further tightening may have to happen. So RBI wants to go squarely after the 4% inflation and not really be comfortable in the 2 to 6% range. They want to go really sharp focused on 4% inflation. But doing that by way of only tinkering with rates has its own inherent risks, which have also been documented in the minutes of the MPC, where any further tightening of rates could have a negative impact on the economy. Now, how does that happen? You increase repo rate. Repo rate right now has been at about 6.5%.
Right.
Now, you increase repo rate any more than this, the ability for the corporate sector to go and raise money from banks, take a debt from banks, starts to dwindle. Right. And what happens, investors like us or people who have some savings want to go pull out money from riskier stock markets, invest that money in fixed deposits, and that in turn gives them assured reasonably decent rate of return, at least inflation beating rate of return, partly pretty much risk free, and that has an impact on the stock markets as well. Now stock markets get impacted, valuation of companies gets impacted. So overall, any further tightening is likely to have a negative impact on the economy.
On the growth.
But RBI again is not very happy with a 5.1% inflation rate and wants to bring it down, hammer it down literally to 4%. And remember, we are also in election year.
All right. So I think, and it's a double-edged sword, neither a high inflation is going to look well for the government nor a slowed economy, Krishna. So I think RBI is very clear there that it's a hawkish pause, which essentially means if need be, we will hike rates again. But it's not going to augur really well for the government that is hoping to put more money in the hands of the people.
True. But at the end of the day, the government would also want to tell people when by the time election comes around that the prices of things haven't gone up too much. It's a great way of getting votes by the time elections comes around. So clearly, you're seeing this from the monetary policy review onwards. The RBI's messaging is on what it's doing is all about containing inflation. It is contained, let's face it. We're not in double-digit inflation like some of the developed countries like UK, which has 10% inflation. We do have extremely contained inflation, but it is not contained according to our own targets. And RBI telling people that, or sending out the message that, we have contained inflation, but we're still looking to get it down to that final percentage point that we want to get it down to. Because that, in my humble opinion, will be a great statistic to tell people that, despite COVID, despite pandemic, despite post-pandemic challenges, we have managed to contain inflation. So RBI clearly, it wants to send out a particular headline. It's been sending it out prior to the monetary policy review onwards, when it paused, the rate hike cycle. And yes, you don't want anybody. I think the RBI is operating at a standpoint where you don't want anybody to feel too comfortable that there are not going to be any rate hikes going forward, or or possibly even a rate cut going forward. So it is possibly keeping everybody on tenterhooks, and at the same time driving home this really simple message that we at this point in time are only concerned about containing inflation, because let's face it, containing things like current account deficit and others is going to be difficult, especially in an election year. So if there was one macroeconomic headline that the RBI and the government would like to have, it is inflation, and that is possible to have while others seem out of reach.
Okay, so the way I read a hawkish pause, Karthik, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that there is not likely to be a cut anytime soon. There could be a hike if need be.
Right.
Is that correct?
Absolutely right. So there is not going to be any cut in rates, and I don't think that is something that can be expected right now. But further hikes cannot be ruled out.
Okay.
So that is why it's a hawkish pause. You're looking at the pause in a very, very pessimistic way.
Okay.
You're looking at the
like
pause
a hawk,
like
perhaps.
a hawk. You're looking at it that, hey, is it time for me to go down and attack it again? And remember, inflation data comes a month later.
Right.
And corrections that you make or tinkering that you make to rates, it will have its impact a month later. So there is usually a good, at least a 2-month gap, 3-month gap between adjustment of rates looking at past inflation data and impact of those adjustments reflecting in future data. They have a good 3-month window. So, and hence the hawkish pause. You're looking at numbers very, very closely. You maintain a pause, but you're ready at a click of a button to up those rates by another maybe 25 basis points, 50 basis points.
So it'll all depend on the inflation data from June onward for MPC to really either cut or pause. I mean, cut, as you said, is unlikely, but a pause or a hike therein that you can expect in the next monetary policy, which is going to be in about 2 months' time from now. So we will, of course, have to wait and watch out for that. But shifting focus now to another important story that we're tracking coming in from EPFO at this point in time, where we are given to understand that several employers and employees have now reached out to Employee Provident Fund Organization asking them to perhaps extend the date for availing higher pension. I want to come to you, Amit, at this point in time. EPFO is a story that we've been tracking here very, very closely. The formula for calculation of higher pension is out, but now the date is just around the corner, 3 days from now. A lot of people don't have enough time to avail that higher pension, and they're asking EPFO to increase the date or the deadline.
Yeah, so there is basically there's lack of clarity mostly on the 1.16% contribution, whether it's going to come from the employer or it is going to come from the government. So that is the center of the clarity that is not there. The clarification was issued by the EPFO on the 3rd of May when the second deadline was extended, time the deadline was extended to the 26th of June. But that is where the thing is. Now,
so let me quickly on where the 1.16 is going to come from. The formula that we have right now, which has been shared by EPFO, it's going to come from our kitty. Is
Absolutely.
that correct?
So I'll tell you how it's going to work is the formula has not been changed, right? The pension formula that existed earlier continues to exist even today. Now, what this formula is made up of is an average of your total pensionable salary, and your total pensionable salary is basically your basic salary plus dearness allowance in the case of government employees, not as much in the private sector. So it's an average of, in the case of people who retired before 1st September 2014, it is the average of the last 12 months of their pensionable salary, basic salary, divided by 12 to give that average monthly figure into number of years of service, which has a maximum cap of 35. Divided by 70. Why 70? Because 35 by 70, 1 by 2, half of your basic income should be your pensionable salary.
Right.
Now, this formula changes slightly in the calculation of the average basic salary or pensionable salary for those who retired after 2014. And instead of taking a 12-month average, you take a 60-month average, and that into number of years of service divided by 70 becomes your total pensionable or your total pension. Now, there is a cap to that.
People like me who may have failed in mathematics when we were growing up, it essentially means that I'm going to get half of my basic salary as pension if I go for higher pension.
Yes and no. Yes and no. Okay. I mean, if your basic salary, let's say, is 50,000 rupees, right? Technically, when you retire after serving for 35 years, you should get 25,000 rupees as your pension. Unfortunately, there's a cap to that, and the cap is 15,000 rupees. So, higher pension makes sense for perhaps employees who have a basic salary of, or a pensionable weighted averaged out salary of about 30,000. Then they get 50% of that salary as pension. Now, of course, this formula got disclosed by EPFO. For some reason, it was very closely guarded, but it got disclosed and uncovered only a couple of weeks ago. And the deadline to opt for higher pension got extended from 3rd of May, which was the earlier deadline, to 26th of June. And 26th of June is around the corner.
Just
we are 3 days away from 26th of June. And unfortunately, the EPFO website continues to be glitchy. The list of documents required to opt for higher pension, it requires a joint certificate declaration between the employer and the employee.
And all the past previous employers as well?
And all the past, yeah. So if you've changed jobs, for example, and your average salary has to be of the last 5 years, and of course you look at the past employers also that you've been associated with, and all that paperwork, all that documentation, and all that to be uploaded and sort of, authenticated by a very, very glitchy, almost always glitchy EPFO website is obviously an issue, and that is resulting in a lot of folks who did opt for this higher pension to seek an extension in the 26th June deadline.
And Amit, we are given to understand they're all knocking on the doors of EPFO asking, and through their representatives, of course, asking for an extension.
Yeah, and they're asking for clarity regarding calculations also. So it seems what I've come to believe, that the wage records at the end maintained by EPFO are not probably in all cases the same as the ones maintained at the employer side. And the biggest thing is what happens to employers that don't exist anymore, or those that have merged. Additionally, there is a problem with people who have already retired. So these are the discrepancies that need to be basically clarified. I'm sure, like you said, the website has a lot of things which basically they're there, but they're not really clear.
Okay.
So the deadline is around the corner. There are things that need to be clarified. So
Right.
I don't know. It's 2 times the deadline has been extended. I'm not too sure that they will extend it or they'll just issue a
Or
clarification.
they need to make better websites there as well. I think a lot of my colleagues have also been struggling to log into EPFO website. And it being a government website, I think the expectations are already very low. But if you're not able to meet the deadline because the website is glitching, then that's a big problem.
Low expectation on the upside with respect to EPFO, they have added 17.2 lakh members this year, out of which 8.47 lakh are members who have come for the first time applying for social security coverage. So yeah, so their pool has increased.
That data is of course used often to calculate the employment that is being generated in the country, and more people getting employed. EPFO data therefore becomes the standard, but EPFO is now being asked to increase or rather extend the deadline from 26th of June to further. We don't know whether that's going to happen or not. We will of course keep tracking all those details. That's all we have on this Friday morning. Thanks very much for watching.
BRHMOS, stealthy, lethal, precise. It flies at 3 times the speed of sound and cuts through a warship like a hot knife through butter. China's navy has threatened its neighbors, and they are turning to the BRHMOS for protection. The warship killer. This and more streaming on world's first news OTT,